I want to provide you a mini lecture to cover some important topics in research methods. I know for some of you this is covering material that you've already covered in research methods or experimental courses, but for others this is new and complicated stuff. Research methods, like biological systems, are foundational materials that are necessary to understand for moving forward in this course. For those of you who have not covered this previously, I encourage you to spend extra time to be sure you understand the vocabulary relevant to these topics. This will make the rest of the semester much easier. For this topic, research methods, a learning objective is to identify and interpret topics in research methodology within the psychological sciences and empirical articles relevant to health psychology. Let me elaborate on what empirical articles are. Empirical articles are research studies which evaluate specific hypotheses. It is getting the results straight from the horse's mouth. Textbooks provide a nice summary of research and are considered a secondary source, but empirical articles, which are considered a primary source, can be found through academic journals. Going straight to the primary source helps you figure it out if interpretation was correct. For example, when you read an article in the newspaper or see the media report on the latest findings in science, you can look up the article where the information originated to be sure it was correctly interpreted and to critically analyze its methodology. Sometimes I hear reports on health on the news, and when I look up the article they're reporting on, I realize they did not correctly interpret the results. Much like you can't believe everything on the internet, you can't believe everything that's reported in secondary sources like newspapers, magazines, and TV. Research methods helps you to be a critical consumer. To help you better understand how psychologists use these research methods within the context of empirical articles, you'll be going through some articles for this topic to fill out a worksheet I've provided that will guide you through the most important aspects of the articles relevant to this topic. It is important to demonstrate how what you know is scientifically based for course assignments and not reporting anecdotal evidence that is just informed by your personal experience. Belief bias is often informed by the idea that correlation does not imply causation, so we need to be sure things are examined systematically and rigorously through appropriate research methods. Your chapter begins and ends with this overarching message. It discusses inferring causality, cautioning against drawing false conclusions based on anecdotal experiences. First, evidence must be consistent. Research must be replicable. Second, alleged cause must have been placed before the disease actually appeared. This makes it necessary to use longitudinal and prospective studies. Third, the relationship must make sense. It must be consistent with physiological findings. And the last two are similar and relate to how predictors and health outcomes are connected. There must be a dose-response relationship between risk factors and health outcomes. These important points are based on the rigor of the research, which is why it's important you understand different research methods used in health psychology. Think about how they differ and why one might be more appropriate than another. The articles assigned for the worksheet and health profile will help you to think carefully about key vocab words. Let's quickly walk through the terminology you need to be familiar with. Descriptive studies help to formulate hypotheses that can be tested through more scientific methods. In other words, these provide a starting point through case studies, demographic surveys, and observational studies. These are all examples of correlational approaches where the researcher is looking for associations between different peoples and predictors of certain health outcomes. We'll go over surveys more when we get to our module on stress. You will have to take different types of stress surveys, and I'll provide you analyses from a dataset from the entire class to test hypotheses. Surveys are often designed using Likert scales, like this one, that allow you to provide a range of answers along a continuum. Another correlational design are developmental studies, which can be cross-sectional studies where data is collected all at once and you can compare cohorts, or longitudinal studies where you're following people across time to see how they change. Experimental studies allow researchers to assess causality by randomly assigning participants to different conditions that they want to compare. The different conditions, or what the researcher is manipulating, is your independent variable. Experimental studies examine how the independent variable impacts the dependent variables. Sometimes we want to compare groups, but we can't randomly assign such things as asthma, ADHD, or being overweight. In these situations, a quasi-experimental study is conducted. Behavior genetics research techniques help to answer questions about how our nature, or genetics, influence and is influenced by our environment, or nurture. In behavioral genetics, researchers usually look at specific genes or use twin studies to estimate what percentage of traits can be explained by genetic factors. Epidemiology research focuses specifically on the incidence, prevalence, and origin of disease. This approach uses both retrospective, where they're looking back on people who currently have a disease, and prospective studies, where they follow people to see if they develop a disease. In epidemiology research, experimental studies called randomized clinical trials are used to find the best approach to improve health outcomes. The final type of research methodology I want you to be familiar with is the meta-analysis. This is a bit different because this is a way a researcher can compile similar studies that have already been done to see what the consistent relation is between variables. For example, there could be one study that found a significant relation between stress and getting sick during finals week, and another that didn't. Maybe one found a strong relation, and another one found one of a weaker magnitude. So what's the real relation? A meta-analysis puts these studies' results together to provide a combined effect. For your second learning objective, I expect you to be able to find primary citations from secondary sources, such as finding articles cited in your textbook, and locate primary sources for specific research questions. You will have to demonstrate this skill throughout the semester on different health profiles and for some module assignments. Check out the tool I provided for you through the library that helps remind you about important ways to refine searches through their library tool. I hope this has been a helpful summary of research methods. As always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me through the discussion board or directly via email.